My outdoor seating had seen its day, so today, let's get a little more comfortable and build this Chaise lounge. This piece is definitely a more modern take on outdoor furniture, and to build it, I'm using 4/4 cypress since it's rot resistant and pretty easy to work with. Before we dive in, we first have to travel back in time for a 10-second template build montage. If you would like these full-scale templates, they're available in the plans for this project, which are linked in the description. Okay, now that we're all caught up, I started by tracing out my templates onto the jointed boards. Once I had my pieces laid out, I used a combination of a bandsaw and a jigsaw to cut the pieces out to rough shape. If you don't have a bandsaw, you cut all these pieces out with a jigsaw. Try to cut as close as you can to the line. I wouldn't recommend leaving more than 1/4 inch of extra material, but here, the less you have, the better. I used some double-sided tape to attach the templates to the rough cut pieces. Then over at the router table, I used a flush trim bit to route the wood chunks to their final shape. Take your time when routing the end grain. I didn't have any tear out, but it would more than likely occur here if it was going to happen. If you're enjoying this video, please give it a like. It really does help a lot. When routing a bunch of pieces like this, I constantly check my hand placement to not get complacent. And if you don't have a router table set up, you could opt for doing the routing with a fixed base or plunge router. I go over this in more detail in my mid-century modern desk build, which you can find linked in the card above. With the template routing out of the way, I marked out and cut down my boards for the slats. I used my joiner to put a clean edge on the boards before cutting them down at the table saw, but this can be done at the table saw with a sled or at the router table with the joining set up. Then at the table saw I cut a clean 90 onto 2 edges of the boards. To cut the slats to the final length, I used my miter gauge with a stop. With this setup, I can cut with the clean edge against my stop, then flip the timber slice and cut the other side. With all my boards cut down to length, I swapped in a ripping blade and ripped the boards to their final width. This process goes pretty quickly, and using a feather board like this one from Magswitch makes it a lot easier to get consistent results because it attaches anywhere to the tabletop. Cue the impossible shot. To seal the bottom of the lounge from ground moisture, I mixed some 2-part epoxy from Total Boat and spread a thin layer onto the bottom edges of the boards. This will prevent water from getting sucked into the wood from the ground and help protect the wood from getting torn up when it's moved around. Back at the router table, I use an 1/8 inch roundover bit to round over all the top edges of the slats. Got a favorite edge profile bit? Let me know what it is down in the comments. I used a strip of tape on the vertical piece to indicate my rough placement for the vertical support and routed around that area. Next, I marked out the placement for the screw holes for the stretchers. And if you want to see more of these projects as they progress, follow me on Instagram at Timber Biscuit Woodwork. I then used a punch and a countersink bit to pre-drill all the screw holes. For this piece, I went with Type-On 3 to glue the pieces together, and after applying glue, I pre-drilled and drove in the screws for the backrest. I next scribed the backrest support and cut the support to length at the bandsaw. If you're digging this content and you want to see more, please consider subscribing. Thank you for your support. I then sanded the cut flat at the disc sander. I then marked out the placement for my dominoes. If you don't have a domino, this can just as easily be done with dowels. Next, I glued in the dominoes and screwed the supports into the base, then squeezed the joint closed with a clamp. To round over any remaining exposed edges, I use a combination of a rasp and sandpaper. Then I laid out the screw holes for the stretchers on the backrest. And finally, it was time to assemble the sides and stretchers. The stretchers are elevated a 1/4 inch off the ground to help with moisture, so I used some plywood offcuts to hold them up while I glued and screwed them in place. The upper stretchers should fit snug enough that you don't need clamps to support them while you attach them. To conceal the screw holes, I'm using plugs, so over at the drill press I cut the plugs using a plug cutting bit. Then I could pop out the plugs and glue them in. I used a countersink bit and set up a stop at the drill press to pre-drill all the lower slats that attach to the base. The holes for the backrest are offset by 1 inch to accommodate for the material thickness. Then I marked a starting line and attached the slats. I used double-sided tape here to hold the first slat in place. Then to attach the remaining slats, I used a strip of 1/4 inch MDF as a spacer. I also made a small reference square from plywood to help keep the slats centered while I attached them. From there, it was just rinse and repeat for the lower slats. Once I was sure about the slat's transition point, I could pre-drill the upper slats with an updated stop at the drill press. Then I attached the upper slats in the same fashion as the bottom. As a side note, the upper portion does require a new setup square. Now I let the top of the back rest long as I wasn't 100% sure where the slats would end. So after marking the end, I cut the piece off with a pull saw. Then I chamfered the ends of all the base pieces. I cut the remaining plugs out, marked the grain direction with a pencil, and glued them in place. I will say the plugs are not 100% necessary, but they do add to the flowing design of this piece. With the plugs trimmed flush and sanded, I could add my mark. Then it was time for the finish. I decided to go with penetrating oil as it should hold up well to the elements. That being said, I'll likely have to finish this piece every year or two. If you're looking to purchase any of the items or tools you've seen in this project, I'll have links in the description. Full disclosure, I do get a few pennies if you buy, but I would never recommend anything that I don't use myself. And finally, with the finish dry, it was time to take this piece outdoors. I'm really happy with how this one turned out. The design is modern and elegant, but sturdy enough for everyday use, and the edge treatments make the whole piece feel more finished, and the plugs make it seamless. Plans for this project are available in the description, and if you like this build, check out some of my other projects. I make new videos all the time, so if you think I've earned it, please subscribe. I'll see you next time.